Daniel Parker opened his eyes at 5:30 in the morning, the same time he had woken every day for the past 15 years. No alarm needed. His body had learned the rhythm of work long before his mind could object. Through the bedroom window, the Rocky Mountains stood as silent sentinels against a sky still painted in shades of purple and gray, the first hints of dawn just beginning to touch the highest peaks. He lay there for a moment, listening to the silence of a house that had once been filled with laughter and the soft padding of feet that were not his own. 4 years now since Megan had passed, and still he reached across the bed sometimes in those half-awake moments, expecting to find her warmth beside him. The empty space never stopped surprising him. The floorboards creaked as he made his way to the kitchen, muscle memory guiding him through the darkness. Coffee first, always coffee. The machine gurgled to life as he stood at the counter, eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the curtains. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a wrench, Grace's latest drawing depicted their house with smoke curling from the chimney and 2 stick figures holding hands in the yard. She had written, "Me and Dad," in careful, uneven letters at the bottom. He checked the calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. 2 oil changes scheduled for the morning, a transmission problem on Jake Henderson's Ford F-150 and Tom Henderson's Chevy that needed new brake pads. Tom couldn't afford to pay Daniel new. The old veteran's pension barely covered his medications, let alone car repairs. But there were some things more important than money, and making sure a man who had served his country could drive safely was one of them. Small footsteps on the stairs pulled him from his thoughts. Grace appeared in the kitchen doorway, her dark, curly hair a tangled mess around her face, her NASA pajamas wrinkled from sleep. At 9 years old, she had her mother's hair and her father's stubborn jaw, a combination that made Daniel's heart ache in the best and worst ways. Her voice came out scratchy with sleep. Pancakes or eggs? I was going to ask you the same thing. Pancakes, but you have to promise not to burn them like last time. Daniel poured himself a cup of coffee, hiding his smile behind the rim. Last time was a fluke. I was distracted by the tax forms. You're always distracted by something. Grace climbed onto her usual stool at the kitchen counter, resting her chin in her hands. That's why I'm learning to cook. Someone in this house needs to know how. Hey, now I can cook. Burning things isn't cooking, Dad. He couldn't argue with that. Megan had been the cook in the family, the one who could turn simple ingredients into meals that made their small kitchen smell like heaven. After she died, Daniel had tried to learn, really tried. But somewhere between the grief and the exhaustion of raising a child alone while running a business, he had settled for frozen dinners and sandwiches and the occasional breakfast that didn't end in smoke. Grace watched him mix the batter with the intensity she brought to everything, her eyes tracking each movement like she was memorizing a scientific formula. You're supposed to add the blueberries after you pour it on the griddle, not before. Since when are you the expert? Since I watched that cooking show at Rosa's house, she said, I have natural talent. Rosa says a lot of things. Rosa is smart. She knows things. Daniel couldn't argue with that either. Rosa Martinez had been working at Parker Auto Repair for 12 years, now longer than anyone else. She knew the business inside and out, knew the customers by name, and most importantly, she knew Daniel well enough to tell him when he was being an idiot, which, according to her, was fairly often. They ate breakfast together at the small table by the window, Grace chattering about her science project and her friend Lily and the upcoming soccer game where she hoped to play forward. Daniel listened, nodding at the right moments, asking questions when the conversation required it. These morning moments with his daughter were the anchor of his days, the reason he got out of bed, the reason he kept going when the weight of everything threatened to crush him. "Dad." Grace's voice cut through his thoughts. "Yeah, sweetheart. You're doing that thing again, where you look at me, but you're not really seeing me." The observation hit him like a small punch to the chest. At 9 years old, his daughter could read him better than anyone else on earth. "Sorry, honey. Just thinking about work." "You're always thinking about work." "Someone has to." "But not at breakfast." Grace stabbed a piece of pancake with her fork. "Breakfast is family time. You said so yourself." "You're right. I'm sorry." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "What were you saying about the science fair?" "I said my project is due Friday, and I still need to finish the display board. Can you help me tonight?" "What time?" "After dinner. I need to mount the photos and write the conclusion." "I'll be there. Promise." Grace looked at him with eyes that had seen too many broken promises, too many late nights at the garage, too many times when work had come first. "You always say that." The words landed heavier than she probably intended. Daniel held her gaze, willing her to believe him. "I mean it this time. 7 o'clock, you and me, science project." "Okay." She didn't sound convinced, but she didn't argue either. That was progress of a sort. The morning sun had fully risen by the time Daniel dropped Grace at the school bus stop, watching until the yellow bus disappeared around the corner before heading to the garage. Parker Auto Repair sat on Main Street in Ridgemont, Colorado, a small building that had been his father's before him and his grandfather's before that. The sign out front was weathered but readable. The bay doors painted the same shade of blue they had been for 50 years. Rosa was already there when he arrived, her silver Honda parked in its usual spot beside the building. She had the coffee pot going and the appointment book open on the counter, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the day's schedule. "You're late," she said without looking up. "I'm 5 minutes early." "For you, that's late." She finally raised her eyes, taking in his appearance with the critical assessment she had perfected over the years. "You didn't sleep well." "I slept fine." "Liar. You have that look. The one where your eyes say you were staring at the ceiling for 3 hours thinking about things you can't change." Daniel poured himself another cup of coffee, his third of the morning. "You should have been a therapist, Rosa." "Therapists don't pay as well as mechanics. Besides, I like getting my hands dirty." She closed the appointment book and handed him a stack of invoices. "The Johnson kid called. His Civic is making that noise again." "Same noise or a new noise?" "He didn't specify. I scheduled him for Thursday." "Good." Daniel flipped through the invoices, his mind already calculating parts costs and labor hours. "Jake coming in today." "He called. Said his truck broke down on the way here. Wants you to look at it when he finally arrives." "That truck is older than Jake is. He needs to let it go." "You tell him that. I'm not getting in the middle of a man and his truck." Daniel snorted. Rosa had a point. Some men were more attached to their vehicles than to anything else in their lives. He understood the feeling. A truck, a car, a motorcycle. These were more than machines. They were memories, freedom, identity. You couldn't put a price on that. The morning passed in the familiar rhythm of oil changes and tire rotations. Daniel lost himself in the work and the smell of motor oil and the feel of tools in his hands. Under a car with grease on his fingers and a problem to solve, the rest of the world faded away. There was only the engine, the diagnosis, the solution. Simple, clean, unlike everything else in life. Tom Henderson arrived just before noon, his old Chevy rumbling into the parking lot with a sound that made Daniel wince. The brakes were worse than he had thought. He could hear the metal on metal grinding from inside the garage. Tom climbed out slowly, his movements careful and deliberate, the product of 72 years of living and 2 tours in Vietnam. He wore his usual uniform of faded jeans and a flannel shirt, his Vietnam veteran cap sitting proudly on his gray hair. Daniel. Tom's handshake was firm despite his age. Thanks for fitting me in. Always got time for you, Tom. Let me take a look. Daniel slid under the Chevy, his trained eyes finding the problem immediately. The brake pads were worn down to the metal backing plates, a condition that was not just uncomfortable, but dangerous. A few more weeks of driving, and Tom could have lost his brakes entirely. He slid back out, wiping his hands on a rag. Brake pads are shot. Need to replace them today. Tom's face fell. How much? Parts are about $150. Labor. Daniel paused, watching the old man's shoulders tighten with worry. Labor's on the house. Daniel, I can't let you keep doing this for free. You served this country for 2 tours. This is the least I can do. That was 50 years ago. Doesn't matter when it was. What matters is that you did it. Daniel met Tom's eyes, his voice firm. Some debts don't have an expiration date, Tom. My father taught me that. Tom was quiet for a moment, his jaw working as he processed the words. Your father was a good man. Would have been proud of what you've done with this place. I hope so. He would have been proud of how you're raising Grace, too. That little girl is something special. The mention of his daughter brought a genuine smile to Daniel's face. She's the best thing I ever did. Only good thing most days. Don't sell yourself short, son. This town would be a lot worse off without you. Tom glanced around the garage at the tools and equipment and the bay doors open to the spring sunshine. Not many people left who know how to fix things the right way, the honest way. Just doing my job. No, you're doing more than that. And some of us notice. Daniel didn't know how to respond to that, so he did what he always did when emotions got too close to the surface. He went back to work. The brake replacement took about an hour, and by the time he finished, Tom's Chevy was running safely again. The old veteran tried one more time to pay, pulling out a worn wallet with trembling hands. Daniel closed Tom's fingers around the leather, pushing it gently back toward him. Buy yourself something nice, Tom, or take your wife out to dinner. The brakes are my gift. You're a stubborn one, Daniel Parker. So I've been told. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garage floor when Jake finally arrived, his own truck limping into the parking lot with a sound that made Daniel wince from 30 feet away. Don't say it, Jake called out as he climbed down from the cab. I wasn't going to say anything. Your face is saying it for you. Daniel walked around the truck, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. 23 years old, this Ford. Jake had bought it the year his father died, some kind of tribute to the old man who had driven the same model. Sentiment was expensive when it came to vehicles. Transmission slipping again. I know. And that knock in the engine is getting worse. I know that too. Jake, at some point, keeping this thing running costs more than buying something new? His employee crossed his arms, jaw set in the stubborn line that Daniel recognized from his own mirror. My dad drove this truck for 15 years, put over 200,000 miles on it before he passed. I'm not ready to let it go. Daniel understood that more than Jake probably realized. In the corner of his garage sat a 1969 Ford Mustang under a tarp, a project he and his father had started together and never finished. Some things couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. All right, pull it into Bay 3. I'll take a look after I finish with the Henderson Chevy. Thanks, boss. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the parts bill. They worked in companionable silence for the next hour, Daniel under the Chevy and Jake organizing the tool wall that never seemed to stay organized. The rhythm of the garage was familiar, comforting. The clank of wrenches, the hiss of pneumatic tools, the occasional country song drifting from the radio, Rosa kept tuned to her favorite station. You ever think about expanding? Jake asked during a lull. Getting more bays, hiring more people. Sometimes, but Daniel slid out from under the Chevy, reaching for a different socket. But bigger isn't always better. My grandfather started this place with 1 bay and a dream. My father grew it to 3 bays and a steady clientele. I've kept it at 3 bays and a good reputation. Some people would call that lack of ambition. Some people measure success by the wrong things. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag, meeting Jake's eyes. I know every customer who walks through that door. I know their families, their problems, their cars. Mrs. Patterson brings me cookies at Christmas because I kept her husband's truck running until he passed. Tom Henderson trusts me with his safety because he knows I'll never cut corners. That's worth more than a bigger building. Jake was quiet for a moment, processing. He was young, still learning that the world offered different definitions of success. Daniel remembered being that age hungry for more, convinced that achievement meant expansion and growth and constant forward motion. Then his mother got sick, and he learned that sometimes the bravest thing was standing still. My dad used to say something. Daniel continued. He said the measure of a man isn't the size of his kingdom. It's whether the people in his kingdom are taken care of. Your dad sounds like he was smart. He was. Smarter than me most days. The phone rang before Jake could respond, and Daniel's afternoon took an unexpected turn toward a mountain road and a woman he didn't yet know would change everything. The phone in the office rang just as Tom was pulling out of the parking lot. Rosa's voice carried across the garage. Daniel, emergency call. He jogged to the office, taking the receiver from Rosa's outstretched hand. Parker Auto Repair. The voice on the other end was female-controlled, but with an edge of panic beneath the surface. I'm stuck on Highway 82 near Independence Pass. My car won't start, and AAA says it will be at least 2 hours. What kind of car? Mercedes E-Class, this year's model. Did anything happen before it stopped? Any warning lights, strange sounds? Nothing. It just died. I pulled over to check my phone, and when I tried to start it again, nothing happened. Daniel glanced at the clock. Nearly 1 in the afternoon. Grace's school bus would drop her at 3. If he left now, he could get to the pass, assess the situation, and be back in time. Stay with your vehicle. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Thank you. Really. The relief in her voice was palpable. I didn't know what else to do. You called the right place. He hung up and grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. Rosa was watching him with knowing eyes. You're going to leave all this work to help some stranger on the mountain. She stuck Rosa. Could be serious. Could be nothing. Could be. Daniel pulled on his jacket. But if it was you up there or Grace, I'd want someone to come. Rosa shook her head, but there was a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. You're too good for your own good, Daniel Parker. Always have been. Just remember that when you're doing my performance review. I don't do performance reviews. I just tell you when you're being stupid. Same thing. The drive up Highway 82 was one Daniel had made hundreds of times. The road wound through some of the most beautiful country in Colorado, climbing from the valley floor toward the Continental Divide. In summer, tourists flooded the route, their rental cars clogging the narrow lanes. But in early spring, with patches of snow still clinging to the higher elevations, the road was mostly empty. He spotted the Mercedes about 20 minutes from the garage, parked on a pullout with its hood raised. A woman stood beside it, her phone pressed to her ear, her body language speaking of frustration and impatience. Even from a distance, Daniel could tell she was out of her element. The business suit, the high heels, the way she kept glancing up and down the empty road, as if expecting rescue to materialize from thin air. He pulled his truck behind the Mercedes and climbed out, approaching slowly so as not to startle her. She ended her call and turned to face him, her expression shifting from wariness to relief when she saw his truck with Parker Auto Repair painted on the door. You must be from the garage. Daniel Parker. What seems to be the problem? I wish I knew. I'm not exactly mechanically inclined. He moved to the front of the car, leaning over the engine. The Mercedes was pristine, clearly well-maintained and expensive. Whatever was wrong, it was unlikely to be anything major. New cars like this didn't just die for no reason. His eyes found the problem almost immediately. The battery terminal connection was loose, probably shaken free by the rough mountain road. A simple fix requiring nothing more than a wrench and 30 seconds of work. Found it. Battery connection came loose. Is that serious? Not even a little. He returned to his truck for his tools, then made quick work of tightening the connection. Try starting it now. She slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine purred to life without hesitation. When she stepped back out, her face had transformed from anxious to grateful. You're a lifesaver. What do I owe you? Nothing. No, please. You drove all the way up here. At least let me pay for your time. Daniel shook his head, wiping his hands on the rag he always kept in his back pocket. I don't charge neighbors for roadside help. But I'm not your neighbor. I live in Denver. Then consider it Colorado hospitality. She studied him for a moment, her head tilted slightly, something flickering behind her eyes that he couldn't quite identify. It felt like recognition, but that didn't make sense. He had never seen this woman before in his life. I'm Victoria. She extended her hand. Victoria Sinclair. Nice to meet you, Victoria. Her handshake was firm, confident, a businesswoman's handshake. Let me at least give you my card, in case you ever need anything. She pulled a business card from her purse and pressed it into his palm. Daniel glanced at it. Victoria Sinclair, CEO, Sinclair Logistics. The title didn't surprise him. Everything about her screamed executive, from her posture to her clothes, to the way she spoke with the automatic authority of someone used to being in charge. Drive safe on your way down, he told her. These roads can be tricky. Thank you again, Daniel. Really. He nodded, climbed back into his truck, and pulled away. In his rearview mirror, he watched her standing beside her Mercedes, watching him go. There was something in her gaze that bothered him, something he couldn't put his finger on, like she was seeing more than just a mechanic who had fixed her car. He shook off the feeling and focused on the road. Grace would be home from school soon, and he had promised to help her with her science project. That was what mattered. Not some CEO from Denver with expensive taste and an unsettling way of looking at him like she knew something he didn't. The rest of the day passed without incident. Daniel made it back to the garage in time to finish the remaining work, then headed home to meet Grace's bus. They spent the evening together working on her science project display board, arguing about the best way to mount the photographs and whether the conclusion needed to be longer. "Your handwriting is messy, Dad." "My handwriting is fine." "It looks like a drunk spider walked across the paper." Daniel laughed despite himself. "Where did you learn that expression?" "Rosa. She says it about your invoices all the time." "Of course she does." They finished the project just after 9, and Daniel tucked Grace into bed with their usual ritual. A story, a glass of water, 3 questions about the universe that he couldn't answer but pretended to think about anyway. "Dad." Her voice was drowsy already, halfway to sleep. "Yeah, sweetheart." "Thanks for being here tonight. I know you're busy." The words cut deeper than any knife. "I'll always be here for you, Grace. Always. Promise. Promise." He sat with her until her breathing evened out, then made his way downstairs to the porch. The night was clear and cold. The stars spread across the sky in a display that city people never got to see. He settled into his usual chair, a beer in his hand, and let the silence wash over him. The business card was still in his pocket. He pulled it out, running his thumb across the embossed letters. Victoria Sinclair, CEO. Something about the name tugged at the edges of his memory, a half-formed connection that refused to solidify. He thought about the way she had looked at him on that mountain road, not with the distant politeness of a stranger, but with something deeper, something that felt almost like searching, as if she was looking for someone inside him, someone she expected to find. Daniel shook his head and tucked the card back into his pocket. He was being ridiculous. She was just a woman with a broken-down car, grateful for the help. Nothing more, nothing less. But when he finally went to bed that night, he found himself thinking about her eyes, dark and intelligent, with a loneliness hiding behind the confident exterior, eyes that reminded him of something, someone. A memory he couldn't quite grasp. Saturday morning brought the ritual Daniel treasured most, teaching Grace about engines. They had started this tradition 2 years ago when Grace asked why her bicycle made a clicking sound, and Daniel realized he had been so focused on survival that he had forgotten to pass on the knowledge his own father had given him. Every Saturday, since unless weather or illness intervened, they spent the morning in the garage learning something new. Today's lesson was brake maintenance. "Why do we need to know about brakes?" Grace asked, settling onto the stool Daniel had positioned next to the old Toyota he kept for teaching purposes. "Because brakes are the most important safety system on any vehicle. You can have the fastest engine in the world, but if you can't stop, you're just a missile waiting for a target." Grace wrinkled her nose. "That's dramatic." "Safety usually is." He walked her through the components: brake pads, rotors, calipers, the hydraulic system that converted foot pressure into stopping power. Grace listened with the intensity she brought to everything, asking questions that showed she was actually thinking rather than just memorizing. "So the brake pads wear down because of friction." "Exactly. Every time you press the brake pedal, the pads squeeze against the rotors. That friction slows the wheel, but it also wears away a little bit of the pad material. Like when I erase something and my eraser gets smaller." Daniel smiled. His daughter had a gift for analogies. "Exactly like that. And just like you need to replace your eraser when it gets too small, You need to replace brake pads when they wear too thin. What happens if you don't? Then metal touches metal. The backing plate of the pad grinds against the rotor. You hear a terrible sound, your stopping distance increases, and eventually, the brakes can fail completely. Grace's eyes went wide. That's scary. That's why we check brakes regularly. Knowledge removes fear. Grace, when you understand how something works, you can take care of it properly. They spent the next hour examining the brake system on the Toyota, Daniel guiding Grace's hands as she learned to measure pad thickness and check rotor condition. Her fingers were small but capable, and she approached the task with the same methodical precision she brought to her science projects. "Grandpa taught you this?" she asked at one point. "He did, and his father taught him. That's 4 generations of Parkers who know how to keep a car stopping safely. Will I teach my kids someday?" The question caught Daniel off guard. He looked at his daughter, grease smudged on her cheek, curiosity bright in her eyes, and felt the weight of legacy settling onto his shoulders. "If you want to. That's the thing about knowledge, Grace. Once you have it, you get to choose what to do with it. Keep it, share it, build on it. It's yours." Grace considered this seriously. "I think I'll share it. It seems selfish to keep it." "Your grandmother would have said the same thing." "Which grandmother?" "Both of them, actually. Your mom's mother and mine. They were different in a lot of ways, but they both believed that what you know is only valuable if you pass it on." Grace nodded, filing this information away in whatever mental cabinet she used for important things. Then she returned her attention to the brake caliper, her small fingers working to understand its mechanism. Daniel watched her, overwhelmed by love and pride and the bittersweet knowledge that she was growing up faster than he was ready for. Megan should have been here for this. Should have been here for all of it. But she wasn't. And Daniel had learned in the 4 years since her death that mourning what should have been was a luxury he couldn't afford. All he could do was be present for what was. And right now, what was included a 9-year-old girl with grease on her face, learning about brakes on a Saturday morning, carrying forward a tradition that stretched back generations. It wasn't the life he had planned. But standing here in the garage his grandfather had built, teaching his daughter the way his father had taught him, Daniel realized it was exactly the life he needed. 2 days later, she came back. Daniel was under a Honda Civic when Rosa's voice echoed through the garage. "Daniel, someone here to see you." He slid out from under the car expecting a customer with a complaint or a question. What he found instead was Victoria Sinclair standing in the middle of his garage, looking as out of place as a diamond in a coal mine. She wore jeans this time, a simple blouse, flat shoes. Still expensive, but more practical, as if she was trying to fit in. "Victoria." He couldn't keep the surprise out of his voice. "Is everything okay with your car?" "The car is fine." She held up a paper bag. "I brought lunch, to say thank you properly." "You didn't have to do that." "I know, but I wanted to." She glanced around the garage, taking in the tools and equipment and the faded photographs on the walls. "This place has history. 3 generations. My grandfather started it. My father built it up. I'm trying not to run it into the ground." "Looks like you're doing more than that." Rosa appeared in the doorway, her eyebrows raised in a question that Daniel pretended not to see. "I'm going to lunch," she announced. "Back in an hour." She disappeared before Daniel could respond, leaving him alone with Victoria and the suddenly thick air between them. "There's a coffee shop next door," he found himself saying. If you want to sit somewhere that doesn't smell like motor oil, I'd like that. They walked the short distance to the coffee shop in silence, Victoria matching his pace despite her shorter stride. The shop was nearly empty, the lunch rush not yet started, and they found a table by the window with a view of Main Street and the mountains beyond. Victoria ordered coffee, Daniel the same. When the cups arrived, she wrapped her hands around hers like she was cold, despite the warmth of the spring day. "I have to tell you something," she said. "The reason I came back." "Okay. You're going to think I'm crazy. Try me." She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. "Do you remember Westfield University about 15 years ago?" The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. Westfield, where he had spent 3 semesters studying mechanical engineering before his mother's diagnosis had forced him to drop out, where he had worked part-time at the campus garage to pay for books, where he had... His breath caught in his throat. "Professor Morrison's physics class," Victoria continued. "There was a study group that met at the library on Thursday nights." Daniel's heart was pounding now, memory flooding back in a rush. The library. Thursday nights. A girl with dark hair and 3 different colors of ink in her notes who asked questions that made the professors pause and think. Tori. The name came out before he could stop it. "You're Tori Miller." Her smile was tremulous, uncertain. "I changed my last name to my mother's after graduation. But yes, I'm Tori." The world tilted sideways. Daniel gripped the edge of the table, trying to anchor himself in reality, while 15 years of buried memories crashed over him like a wave. Tori Miller. The girl he had saved from a group of drunk fraternity brothers outside the library one October night. The girl he had walked home then, sat with on the steps of her dormitory, talking until the sun came up. The girl who had kissed him at dawn, her lips soft and warm and tasting of the coffee they had shared. The girl he had left behind when he dropped out of school to take care of his dying mother. "I looked for you." His voice came out rough-scraped raw by emotion. "After I left, I tried to find you. I looked for you too, but you had disappeared. No forwarding address, no phone number, nothing. It was like you had never existed. I deleted everything, cut all ties to that life. I couldn't..." He stopped, struggling to find words for feelings he had buried so deep he had forgotten they were there. "I couldn't have reminders of what I was giving up." Victoria was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Your mother. Cancer. She died 6 months after I came home. I stayed to take care of her then, to take over the garage when my father couldn't handle it anymore. He passed 2 years later." "I'm so sorry, Daniel. It was a long time ago. Some things don't stop hurting just because time passes." She was right, of course. The old wounds still ached when he let himself feel them. The lost futures, the abandoned dreams, the life he might have had if fate had dealt him a different hand. "Why now?" he asked. "Why come back after all these years?" Victoria looked down at her coffee, then back up at him with an honesty that took his breath away. "Because I never stopped wondering what happened to you. Because I've spent 15 years building an empire and achieving everything I thought I wanted, and none of it ever felt as real as that one night on the dormitory steps. Tori, I know it sounds crazy. We barely knew each other. One night, one conversation, one kiss. It shouldn't mean anything after all this time. But it does. It does." Her voice cracked slightly on the admission. "You were the first person who ever saw me. Really saw me. Not what I could do or what I could become, just me. Daniel remembered that night with sudden vivid clarity, the way she had talked about her dreams, her fears, her hopes for the future. The way she had listened when he talked about his love of engines and his complicated relationship with his father. The way the world had shrunk to just the two of them sitting on cold concrete steps while the stars wheeled overhead. "You were special," he said quietly. "I knew it then. That's why I couldn't contact you after I left. I knew if I heard your voice, I would try to go back. And I couldn't. My mother needed me. I understand that now. I didn't then. I thought—" She paused, composing herself. "I thought you had just used me, that the night didn't mean anything to you. It meant everything to me." The words hung between them heavy with 15 years of silence and wondering. "So what now?" Daniel asked finally. "I don't know." Victoria's smile was sad, uncertain. "I just know I had to find you, had to see if there was anything left of what we had. Tori, I'm not the same person I was at 23. I'm a widower with a 9-year-old daughter. I run a small-town garage and I go to bed at 10 o'clock most nights. My life is small and simple and a million miles away from what you've built. And you think I'm looking for the 23-year-old? I don't know what you're looking for." "Neither do I." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. "But I'd like to find out, if you're willing." Before he could answer, the bell above the coffee shop door chimed. Daniel looked up and felt his heart sink. Grace stood in the doorway, her school backpack hanging from one shoulder, her eyes locked on the woman sitting across from her father. The school bus must have dropped her early, or he had lost track of time. Either way, his daughter was here, and from the look on her face, she had already drawn conclusions. "Dad," Grace's voice was carefully neutral the way it got when she was trying to hide strong emotions. "Who is this?" "Grace, this is Victoria, an old friend from college." Grace walked slowly to their table, her eyes never leaving Victoria's face. She had Megan's ability to assess people with a single look, to see through pretense and posturing to the truth beneath. "Are you going to be Dad's girlfriend?" The bluntness of the question made Daniel wince. Victoria, to her credit, didn't flinch. "We're just talking," Victoria said, "getting to know each other again. Adults always say that. Then everything changes." "You're right. Adults do say that, and things do change. But I'm going to make you a promise, Grace. I won't lie to you. If you ask me something, I'll tell you the truth." Grace considered this, her young face serious beyond her years. "Do you want to be Dad's girlfriend?" Victoria held the child's gaze. "I don't know yet. We're just starting to reconnect. But I promise to tell you if that changes." "Why should I believe you?" "Because I know what it's like to have adults make promises they don't keep. My father left when I was 10. He said he was coming back. He never did." Something shifted in Grace's expression, a crack in the wall she had built around herself. "My mom said she would come back too. The day she died, she said she would be home for dinner." Daniel's throat tightened. They had never talked about this, not directly. He had tried so many times, but Grace had always deflected, changed the subject, refused to engage. Victoria lowered herself to Grace's eye level, her voice gentle. "Losing your mom wasn't your fault. You know that, right? People say that. Do you believe them?" Grace's lower lip trembled, the first sign of vulnerability Daniel had seen from her in months. "Sometimes, Not always. That's okay. Sometimes the things we know in our heads take a long time to reach our hearts. Victoria straightened up, giving Grace space. I should probably go, but maybe I'll see you again sometime. Grace looked at her father, then back at Victoria. Maybe. It was not acceptance, but it was not rejection either. For Grace, that was practically an invitation. After Victoria left Daniel, and Grace walked back to the garage together, his daughter was quiet, processing the gears of her mind almost visibly turning. She seems nice, Grace said finally. She is nice. How do you know her? We went to college together, before you were born, before I met your mom. Did you like her back then? Daniel chose his words carefully. We were friends. We talked a lot that one year I was at school. Did you kiss her? The question caught him off guard. Once, a long time ago. Grace nodded as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. Are you going to kiss her again? I don't know, Grace. Everything is very new and very complicated. That's what adults say when they don't want to answer. Sometimes it's also the truth. They reached the garage and Grace stopped at the door, turning to face her father with an expression that was heartbreakingly mature. I don't want you to be sad anymore, Dad, but I don't want things to change either. Those might not be possible at the same time, sweetheart. I know. She sighed, a sound too weary for a 9-year-old. I'm trying to be okay with that. You don't have to be okay with anything. You just have to be honest with me about how you feel. I feel scared. The admission hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. He knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level the way Victoria had done. What are you scared of? That if you get a new girlfriend, you'll forget about me. Or about Mom. Grace, listen to me. He took her hands in his, willing her to believe what he was about to say. I could never forget your mother. She was the love of my life, and she gave me you, the greatest gift anyone could ever give. And I could never forget you. You are everything to me. Everything. No matter what happens, that will never change. Promise. I promise. Grace comes first. Always. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for any sign of doubt or deception. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slowly and wrapped her arms around his neck in a tight hug. Okay, Dad. I believe you. Thank you, sweetheart. That night, after Grace was asleep, Daniel sat on the porch again with his beer and his thoughts. Victoria's business card was on the table beside him, a small rectangle of paper that represented a door to a past he had thought was closed forever. Tori Miller, Victoria Sinclair, the girl from the dormitory steps, the CEO who had driven 90 minutes to bring him lunch and ask if there was anything left of what they had shared for one night 15 years ago. The truth was, he didn't know. He had loved Megan truly and completely for the 13 years they were together. She had been his partner, his best friend, the mother of his child. Losing her had nearly destroyed him. But there had been something with Tori that night so long ago. Something that had never quite faded, no matter how hard he tried to bury it. A connection, a recognition, a sense that he had found someone who understood him in ways no one else ever had. Could that still exist after all this time? After all they had both been through? He picked up the card, turning it over in his hands. On the back, in handwriting that was surprisingly uncertain for a CEO, Victoria had written a phone number and a note, in case you want to keep talking. Daniel thought about Grace's fear, her vulnerability, her reluctant willingness to try. He thought about Megan, about what she would have wanted for him, for their daughter. He thought about the years stretching ahead, the empty bed, the silence of a house where only two people lived. He pulled out his phone and typed a message before he could talk himself out of it. "There's a science fair at Grace's school Friday night. If you want to see what my life actually looks like." The response came within seconds. "What time?" 6 o'clock. Ridgemont Elementary. Don't be late. I won't be. Daniel set the phone down and looked up at the stars, feeling something shift inside his chest. It might have been hope. It might have been fear. It was probably both. One thing was certain: his quiet, simple life was about to get a lot more complicated. And for the first time in 4 years, he found that he didn't entirely mind the thought. Friday arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that made Colorado postcards look understated. The sky stretched endless and blue above Ridgemont, the mountains still capped with snow that would linger for another month at least, and Daniel found himself checking his watch every 15 minutes like a teenager waiting for a first date. Grace had noticed. Of course she had. His daughter missed nothing. "You're nervous." She made the observation while arranging her science project display for the third time that afternoon. "Your jaw does that thing when you're nervous. The muscle twitches." "My jaw is fine." "It's twitching right now." Daniel forced his facial muscles to relax, aware that the effort probably made him look constipated rather than calm. "I just want your science fair to go well." "It's not about the science fair." Grace adjusted a photograph on her display board, not meeting his eyes. "It's about her. Victoria." There was no point in denying it. His daughter had inherited her mother's ability to see through any attempt at deflection. "Maybe a little." "She's really coming." "She said she would." People say a lot of things. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. Daniel heard every broken promise, every disappointed expectation, every time an adult had let Grace down, echoing in those 5 syllables. "If she doesn't come, we'll still have a good night. You and me, like always." Grace finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "But you want her to come." "I do." "Why?" It was a fair question, and Daniel struggled to find an answer that would make sense to a 9-year-old. "Because sometimes people from our past show up again, and we want to know why. We want to know if there's still a connection or if we just imagined it." "Did you imagine it with her?" "I don't think so, but I'm still figuring it out." Grace considered this, then returned her attention to her display board. "Okay, but if she makes you sad, I won't like her." "Fair enough." The school gymnasium transformed into a maze of folding tables and poster boards, each station representing weeks of work by students ranging from kindergartners with baking soda volcanoes to 5th graders with surprisingly sophisticated experiments. Daniel helped Grace set up in her assigned spot near the back of the room, checking the electrical connections for her demonstration apparatus, and making sure her carefully printed conclusion was visible from the aisle. At 5:55, Victoria walked through the gymnasium doors. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger, more approachable. The transformation from the polished CEO he had rescued on the mountain road was striking. She looked like she belonged here among the other parents and the chaos of childhood achievement. Grace spotted her before Daniel could say anything. His daughter's body went rigid, her eyes tracking Victoria's approach with the wariness of a small animal assessing a potential predator. Victoria stopped a few feet away, giving Grace space. "I made it." "You're early." Grace's voice was carefully neutral. "I didn't want to be late. This is important." It's just a science fair. It's your science fair. That makes it important. Something flickered in Grace's expression too quick for Daniel to identify. She turned back to her display, adjusting a photograph that didn't need adjusting. The judges come around in 20 minutes. Dad can explain my project to you if you want. I'd rather hear it from you, if that's okay. Grace hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the request. Most adults talked over her, around her, about her. Few asked for her direct input. Okay, she pointed to her display board. It's about generating electricity from friction in everyday life. See, when you rub certain materials together, electrons transfer from one surface to another. That's called the triboelectric effect. Victoria leaned in, her attention fully focused on Grace's explanation. She asked questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite tolerance, and Daniel watched his daughter slowly unfold under the unexpected engagement. Then disaster struck. A boy from Grace's class came running past chasing a friend, and his backpack caught the edge of her display. The poster board tilted backward, the apparatus sliding toward the edge of the table. Daniel was too far away, blocked by other parents, unable to reach it in time. Victoria moved without hesitation. Her hand shot out, catching the board before it could fall, but the position was awkward, unstable. She needed something to prop it up. Grace, I need something rigid. Anything that can support weight. I don't have anything. I used everything for the base. Victoria's free hand was already moving, pulling something from her pocket. Business cards, a thick stack of them, probably meant for networking at whatever conference she had been attending before she diverted to Colorado. She began folding them rapidly, creating small triangular supports with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood structural principles. Hold this steady for me. Grace grabbed the corner of the board while Victoria wedged the improvised supports underneath, distributing the weight across multiple points. Within seconds, the display was stable again, more secure than it had been before. How did you know to do that? Grace's voice held reluctant admiration. Physics, weight distribution, and load-bearing angles. Victoria straightened up, brushing off her hands. Someone taught me a long time ago, using car engines as examples. He had a way of making complicated things make sense. Grace looked at her father, then back at Victoria, the connection clicking into place. Dad taught you. The best lesson I ever got. The judges arrived 15 minutes later, and Grace presented her project with a confidence that had been shaky before, but now seemed reinforced by something stronger than practice. She answered their questions, clearly demonstrated her apparatus successfully, and managed to incorporate the near disaster into her explanation of why proper support structures mattered in any scientific setup. When the results were announced, Grace took third place. Not first, not the prize she had been hoping for, but the bronze ribbon in her hands might as well have been gold from the expression on her face. Daniel swept her into a hug, lifting her off the ground the way he had when she was small enough to carry everywhere. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I didn't win. You competed. You worked hard. You handled a crisis without falling apart. That's winning in every way that matters. Victoria stood slightly apart, giving them their moment, but Grace surprised everyone by including her in the circle. Thanks for saving my project. You saved it. I just provided the building materials. You used your business cards. Those are expensive, right? Not as expensive as watching your hard work fall apart. Grace studied her for a long moment, some internal calculation happening behind her eyes. Do you want to come get ice cream with us? Dad always takes me for ice cream after the science fair. It's tradition. Daniel held his breath. This was unprecedented. Grace guarded their traditions fiercely, rarely allowing outsiders into the rituals that had sustained them through grief and adaptation. Victoria seemed to understand the significance. Only if you're sure. I'm sure, but you have to try the chocolate peanut butter. It's the best one. The ice cream parlor on Main Street had been in Ridgemont for 40 years, its red vinyl booths and chrome counter unchanged since Daniel's own childhood. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, knew everyone in town and their usual orders, but she raised an eyebrow when Daniel walked in with Victoria. Grace claimed the booth by the window, sliding in with her ribbon still clutched in one hand. Victoria sat across from her, and Daniel took the spot next to his daughter, forming a configuration that felt both natural and strange. "Tell me about your next project," Victoria said to Grace. "What are you going to do for the 6th grade fair?" "I'm only in 4th grade." "I know, but you're already thinking about it. I can tell." Grace's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm she usually reserved for conversations with adults who actually listened. "I want to build a small wind turbine, one that could power a phone charger. Dad says the engineering might be too complicated, but I think I can figure it out." "Have you looked at vertical axis designs? They're more efficient at lower wind speeds." "What's vertical axis mean?" Victoria grabbed a napkin and began sketching her pen, creating a rough diagram of turbine blades arranged around a central column. "See traditional windmills spin like this facing into the wind, but vertical axis turbines spin around an upright shaft so they catch wind from any direction." Grace leaned forward, completely absorbed. "That would work better in our backyard. The wind changes all the time there." "Exactly. And the engineering is actually simpler because you don't need a mechanism to turn the whole assembly." Daniel watched the exchange with a feeling he couldn't quite name. It wasn't jealousy exactly, though there was an element of that. More like wonder. He had tried for years to engage Grace's scientific curiosity, but his knowledge was practical, hands-on, rooted in the mechanical realities of engines and transmissions. Victoria spoke a different language, one of principles and theories and designs that existed first on paper before they became real. Together, they might give Grace something neither could provide alone. The thought settled into his chest like a small, warm ember. They stayed at the ice cream parlor until closing, Grace and Victoria deep in conversation about wind turbines and electrical generation and the physics of energy transfer. When Mrs. Patterson finally shooed them out with the gentle firmness of a woman who had been closing shops since before any of them were born, Grace was practically bouncing with ideas. "Can Victoria come to our house? I want to show her my notes. I have a whole notebook of project ideas." Daniel looked at Victoria, searching for any sign of reluctance. "If she wants to, I'd love to see them." The Parker home had never felt small to Daniel until he saw it through Victoria's eyes. The worn furniture, the outdated kitchen, the photographs of Megan that still hung on every wall. She took it all in without comment, but he could see her processing, evaluating, trying to understand the life he had built in the years since they had known each other. Grace disappeared upstairs to retrieve her notebooks, leaving them alone in the living room. "Your house is beautiful," Victoria said quietly. "It's not much. It's a home. That's worth more than square footage." She moved to the mantel, studying the wedding photograph that held the place of honor. She was lovely, Megan. She was everything. For a long time, she was everything I had. And Grace. Grace is what I have now. The reason I get up in the morning. Victoria turned from the photograph, her expression unguarded in a way Daniel had rarely seen. "I never had that. Someone to live for. I built my company, made my money, acquired all the things that are supposed to mean success. But I go home to an empty apartment and wonder what the point of any of it is. Success isn't meaningless. No, but it's not enough either. She moved closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. I've spent 15 years trying to fill a hole that was never actually about achievement. It was about connection, about being seen by someone who mattered. And now I'm standing in the living room of a man I kissed once 15 years ago, hoping that whatever we had then isn't completely gone. Grace's footsteps on the stairs interrupted whatever Daniel might have said. His daughter appeared with a battered spiral notebook clutched to her chest, completely unaware of the moment she had broken. I found it. I have 23 project ideas in here. The next 2 hours disappeared in a blur of sketches and explanations and increasingly elaborate designs. Grace showed Victoria every idea from the practical to the fantastical, and Victoria responded to each one with serious consideration and thoughtful questions. By the time exhaustion finally caught up with Grace, her notebook was covered in new annotations, and her eyes were heavy with satisfied tiredness. "Time for bed, sweetheart," Daniel said. "But we were just getting to the good ones." "The good ones will still be there tomorrow." Grace groaned, but didn't argue, gathering her notebook and trudging toward the stairs. At the bottom step, she paused and looked back at Victoria. "Will you come back to help with the wind turbine?" "If your dad says it's okay." Grace turned her gaze to Daniel, waiting. "It's okay," he said. His daughter nodded once, something shifting in her expression. Not acceptance, not yet, but the beginning of openness. "Good night, Victoria." "Good night, Grace." After Grace was in bed, Daniel walked Victoria to her car. The night had turned cold, their breath visible in the mountain air stars spread across the sky in patterns that city dwellers never got to see. "Thank you for tonight," Daniel said. "Thank you for inviting me, for letting me into this part of your life. Grace doesn't warm up to people easily. What you did tonight with the project, with the ideas, that mattered." Victoria leaned against her car, looking up at the stars. "I like her. She's smart and fierce, and she doesn't pretend to be anything she's not. She reminds me of someone." "Megan. You. She reminds me of you." Daniel didn't know how to respond to that, so he stayed silent. "I want to keep seeing you," Victoria said. "Both of you. I know it's complicated. I know there's history and grief and a dozen reasons why this is crazy. But I haven't felt this alive in 15 years, and I'm not ready to let that go. My life isn't like yours, Victoria. I can't fly to Denver for dinner or take weekends in Aspen. I have a business to run and a daughter to raise and responsibilities that don't take breaks. I know, and I'm not asking you to change any of that." She pushed off from the car, closing the distance between them. "I'm asking for a chance to see if what we had can become something new. And if it can't, then at least we'll know, instead of spending another 15 years wondering." She kissed him, then soft and brief and full of questions that had no easy answers. When she pulled back, Daniel felt like he was standing at a crossroads, the path ahead shrouded in fog. "Think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking." He watched her drive away, the taillights disappearing around the corner of his quiet street. Then he went inside, checked on Grace, and sat on the porch until the cold drove him to bed. He didn't sleep well that night, but for the first time in 4 years, the restlessness wasn't from grief. It was from hope, fragile and terrifying and impossible to ignore. 3 weeks passed, each one bringing Victoria deeper into their lives. She rented a cabin at the edge of town, working remotely while spending her evenings at the Parker house or the garage or the coffee shop where Daniel had first learned who she really was. The pattern emerged organically, Victoria arriving Wednesday afternoon, staying through Sunday morning, then driving back to Denver for the business that still demanded most of her attention. Grace's resistance crumbled slowly, like ice melting in spring sunshine. She still held part of herself back, still watched Victoria with the wariness of someone waiting for disappointment. But she also started seeking Victoria out for help with homework, for conversations about science, for the kind of female presence that had been missing from her life since Megan's death. Daniel watched the transformation with a complicated mixture of gratitude and fear. Every moment of connection between Grace and Victoria was a gift, but it was also a risk. If this fell apart, Grace wouldn't be the only one with a broken heart. The knowledge Daniel had passed to Grace proved its worth on an ordinary Wednesday. Sarah Lily's mother called in a panic from the grocery store parking lot. Her Honda wouldn't start, and Grace happened to be with her after a play date. Grace took the phone from Sarah's trembling hands. "Dad, I can see white-green stuff on the battery terminals, like fuzzy mold. Is that the oxidation you taught me about?" Pride surged through Daniel's chest. "That's exactly what it is. Can you find some water?" "Sarah has a bottle in her purse." "Pour a little on the terminals. Not too much. Then wipe it dry with a napkin." 5 minutes later, the engine turned over. Sarah's voice came through incredulous. "She fixed my car. A 9-year-old fixed my car." "She didn't fix it," Daniel corrected. "She understood what was wrong and applied what she knew. That's even better." That evening, Grace recounted the story to Victoria with barely contained excitement. "Mom, Victoria, you should have seen Sarah's face. She couldn't believe I knew what to do." Victoria smiled at Daniel over Grace's head. "Sounds like someone has a good teacher." "The best," Grace agreed. "Dad says knowledge is freedom. Now I understand what he means." The wind turbine project became their shared obsession. Every evening that Victoria was in Ridgemont, she and Grace spread papers across the kitchen table, sketching designs and calculating power outputs, and debating the merits of different blade configurations. Daniel contributed when he could his practical knowledge, balancing their theoretical explorations, but mostly he watched from the doorway, marveling at the connection forming between them. "The problem is efficiency," Grace explained one night, her pencil tapping against a diagram covered in her neat handwriting. "Vertical axis turbines are easier to build, but they don't capture as much energy as horizontal axis designs." "True, but horizontal axis turbines need to face into the wind," Victoria countered. "In your backyard, where the wind direction changes constantly, you'd need a mechanism to rotate the whole assembly. What if we combined them, like a vertical axis base with horizontal axis elements?" Victoria's eyebrows rose. "That's actually a fascinating idea. There's research into hybrid designs, but nothing commercial yet." "So we could be the first. We could certainly try." Daniel cleared his throat from the doorway. "Before you two revolutionize the renewable energy industry, someone needs to eat dinner." Grace groaned. "Dad, we're in the middle of something important." "Food is also important. Your brain needs fuel to solve engineering problems." "He has a point," Victoria admitted. "And I'm starving." They ate at the kitchen table, pushing papers aside to make room for plates. The meal was simple pasta with sauce from a jar, salad from a bag, but the conversation was anything but. Grace peppered Victoria with questions about her college education, her early career, the challenges she had faced building her company. Did people ever tell you that you couldn't do something because you were a girl? Victoria's expression flickered. All the time. When I started in logistics, it was almost entirely men. They assumed I was someone's secretary or that I was there to take notes. It took years to prove that I belonged in the room. How did you prove it? By being better than they were? By knowing more, working harder, refusing to back down when they tried to push me out. Victoria set down her fork, her eyes meeting Grace's with unusual intensity. It wasn't fair that I had to work twice as hard for half the recognition, but fair doesn't matter when you're trying to survive. What matters is results. That sounds exhausting. It was. It still is sometimes. Victoria glanced at Daniel, then back at Grace. But it's also why I understand what you're doing with this turbine project. You're not just building a science fair entry. You're proving that a 9-year-old girl can understand engineering concepts that most adults never bother to learn. Grace straightened in her chair, something shifting in her expression. I never thought of it that way. Most people don't. They see a cute project, a clever kid, something to smile at and forget. But I see a young woman who refuses to accept that certain subjects are too hard for her. That matters, Grace. That's how change happens. The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of Victoria's words settling over them. Daniel watched his daughter process the compliment, saw the way it landed differently than the usual praise she received from teachers and family friends. This wasn't condescension disguised as encouragement. This was recognition from someone who had walked a similar path. Thanks, Grace said finally, her voice small but steady. That means a lot. You're welcome. Now finish your pasta. We have a turbine to design. The first serious crack appeared on a Thursday afternoon. Daniel was under a Chevy Silverado when Rosa's voice cut through the familiar sounds of the garage. Daniel, someone here to see you, not Victoria. He slid out from under the truck, wiping his hands on a rag. The man standing in the garage entrance was unfamiliar but instantly recognizable as a type. Expensive suit, perfectly styled silver hair, the posture of someone who expected the world to arrange itself according to his preferences. Mr. Parker, I'm Marcus Webb, CEO of Western Alliance Transportation. The name rang a bell. Victoria had mentioned Western Alliance as one of her company's major partners, a relationship that represented a significant portion of Sinclair Logistics' revenue. What can I do for you, Mr. Webb? I'm passing through town and my car is making an unusual noise. I was hoping you could take a look. The explanation was plausible, but the delivery was wrong. Men like Marcus Webb didn't stop at small-town garages. They had dealerships and service contracts and people whose job it was to handle inconveniences. Sure, pull it into the bay, and I'll see what I can find. The noise turned out to be nothing, a loose component that took 30 seconds to fix. But Marcus showed no inclination to leave lingering in the garage with the casualness of someone who had plenty of time and a specific agenda. You know, Victoria Sinclair. Not a question. Daniel kept his voice neutral. We've met. More than met, from what I understand. She's been spending quite a bit of time in this town. With you. That's her business. Her business is my business, Mr. Parker. We have a partnership that represents tens of millions of dollars in annual revenue. When the CEO of my partner company starts making unusual choices, I pay attention. Daniel straightened to his full height, meeting Marcus's eyes. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply observing that Victoria is a brilliant businesswoman who seems to be distracted by personal matters, matters that might not be appropriate for someone in her position. And by inappropriate, you mean what? That she's spending time with a mechanic instead of someone with a corner office? Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. You're direct. I appreciate that. So let me be direct as well. Victoria belongs in Denver, running her company, maintaining her partnerships. Whatever is happening here, it's a distraction she can't afford. That sounds like a threat. It's an observation and a piece of advice from someone who has watched many promising careers derail because of poor personal choices. Marcus adjusted his cuffs, the gesture casual but deliberate. Victoria is an exceptional woman. She deserves someone who matches her ambition, her status, her future. Do you really think that's you? Daniel held the other man's gaze, refusing to show the anger churning in his chest. I think Victoria is capable of deciding what she wants without input from either of us. Perhaps. But sometimes people need to be protected from their own impulses. Marcus turned toward the door, then paused. Think about what's best for her, Mr. Parker. Not what you want, but what she deserves. He left without waiting for a response, his expensive car purring out of the parking lot. Rosa emerged from the office as soon as he was gone. What was that about? Apparently, some people think Victoria is making a mistake by being here. Some people need to mind their own business. Yeah, but they rarely do. Victoria arrived that evening, her expression tight with concern. Marcus came to see you. Word travels fast. He called me from his car, told me he had stopped by to check on the situation. She paced the length of his living room, her usual composure cracked. I'm sorry, Daniel. I should have warned you this might happen. What exactly is happening? There's a faction on my board that thinks I'm losing focus. Richard Thornton has been building support for months, questioning my decisions, suggesting that the company needs leadership that isn't distracted by personal matters. She stopped pacing, facing him. Marcus is one of his allies. This visit wasn't a coincidence. It was reconnaissance. So your business partners are threatening you because you're spending time in Colorado. They're threatening me because they want control of the company and I'm in their way. My presence here is just the excuse they're using. Daniel processed this information, the corporate politics so foreign to his world of engines and transmissions. What happens if they succeed? They won't succeed. I built this company from nothing. I know every contract, every relationship, every detail of how it operates. They can't push me out. But they can make things difficult. Yes, they can make things very difficult. Victoria sank onto the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. I've been fighting these battles for years, Daniel. It's part of the job. But now they're trying to use this as a weapon against me. Then maybe you should go back to Denver. Fight your battles there. Victoria's head snapped up. Is that what you want? What I want isn't the point. What's best for you is the point. Don't do that. Her voice turned sharp. Don't decide what's best for me without asking me what I want. I had enough of that from my father, from every man who thought he knew better than I did about my own life. I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to understand why you're fighting so hard for something that's clearly costing you. Because some things are worth the cost. She stood up, crossing to where he sat, taking his hands in hers. Because I spent 15 years building an empire, and it never once made me feel the way I feel when I'm here with you and Grace. Because you asked me to a science fair and it mattered more than any board meeting I've ever attended. Daniel looked at their intertwined fingers, her perfectly manicured nails against his work-roughened skin. The contrast captured everything about their situation, the gap between their worlds that neither of them could entirely bridge. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything you've built. You're not the reason. Richard Thornton and his ambition are the reason. I'm just the obstacle they need to remove. She squeezed his hands. Let me handle my company. Trust me to know what I'm doing. I do trust you. Then stop trying to send me away. Stop assuming that your life isn't worth fighting for. Her eyes held his, fierce and determined and vulnerable, all at once. Daniel realized that sending her away wouldn't protect her, wouldn't even protect himself. The only path forward was through. Okay, he said, we fight. Together. The crisis came 3 days later, on a morning that had started like any other. Daniel was in the garage at 7, coffee in hand, reviewing the day's schedule with Rosa. Grace was at school working on a group project with her friend Lily. Victoria had returned to Denver the day before, promising to be back by Friday. His phone rang at 9:30. Victoria's number, but her voice was wrong when he answered, tight and controlled in a way that spoke of barely contained panic. Western Alliance is threatening to pull their contracts, all of them. Marcus convinced them that I'm no longer committed to the partnership. A breath shaky. I have to deal with this in person. There's an emergency board meeting tomorrow. What does that mean for you? It means I can't come back this week. Maybe not for a while. Another pause, longer this time. Grace has her school performance on Friday. I promised I would be there. Daniel's stomach dropped. She's been talking about it for weeks. I know. God, I know. Victoria's voice cracked. But if I don't handle this, everything falls apart. The company, the employees who depend on me, everything I've built. I can't let that happen. I understand. Do you? Because I need you to understand. I'm not choosing work over her. I'm trying to save something that matters so I can keep being here for both of you. I said I understand, and I meant it. Daniel forced himself to breathe through the disappointment. Go save your company. I'll explain to Grace. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I'll make it up to her. I'll tell her. Daniel. Her voice was very small now. I love you. I know we haven't said it, but I need you to know. Whatever happens with the company, that's true. The words hung in the air, weighty and unexpected. Daniel gripped the phone tighter. I love you too. Now go fight your battles. She hung up, and Daniel stood alone in his garage, trying to figure out how to explain to his daughter that another adult had broken a promise. Grace took the news exactly as badly as he had feared. Her face went blank when he told her that careful emptiness she had perfected in the months after Megan's death. No tears, no tantrums, just a wall coming down between herself and the world. She's not coming. She has to deal with a problem at work, a serious one. There's always a problem. Grace's voice was flat. People always have reasons. Mom said she would get better. She said the treatment was working. She said she'd be home for dinner. Daniel's heart cracked along fault lines he had thought were healed. That's different, sweetheart. Your mother didn't choose to leave. Victoria will come back. You say that. Everyone says that. But how do you know? I know because she told me she loves us. Both of us. Words don't mean anything, Dad. Actions mean something. And her action is not being here. He couldn't argue with the logic, couldn't find the right words to defend a choice he privately questioned himself. So he did the only thing he could do. He held his daughter while she didn't cry, feeling the tremors of emotions she refused to let surface. "I'm sorry, Grace. I know this hurts." "It doesn't hurt." The lie was transparent, but he let her keep it. "I just knew this would happen. I knew she would leave." The school performance came and went. Daniel sat in the audience alone, watching Grace play her small part with mechanical precision and empty eyes. She hit her mark, said her lines, smiled when smiling was required. But the light that had been returning to her over the past weeks had dimmed again, and Daniel didn't know how to bring it back. 3 days passed with no word from Victoria beyond brief texts, meetings running long. "Board vote pending. Will call when I can." Daniel threw himself into work, filling the silence with the noise of engines and the comfort of problems he knew how to solve. Rosa watched him with worried eyes but said nothing, respecting his need to cope in his own way. On the 4th day, Victoria appeared at the garage without warning. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her usual polish replaced by something rawer. "I handled it. Richard is out. The board backed me. Western Alliance is staying. Congratulations." "Don't." She moved toward him, then stopped. "Don't congratulate me. I missed Grace's performance. I broke a promise. You had reasons." Reasons don't matter to a 9-year-old who already thinks every adult in her life will abandon her. She was right, and they both knew it. "What now?" Daniel asked. "Now I try to fix what I broke. If you'll let me. If Grace will let me." "I can't speak for Grace. She's having a hard time." "I know. I expected that." Victoria finally closed the distance between them, her hands finding his. "I'm restructuring the company, promoting Jessica Chen to CEO, stepping back to a chairman role. Less day-to-day involvement, more time here." "You're giving up your company." "I'm delegating my company. There's a difference." Her eyes searched his face. "I meant what I said on the phone, Daniel. I love you. I love Grace. I'm not willing to lose either of you because of conference calls and board meetings. What if it's not enough? What if the damage is already done? Then I'll keep trying until it is enough, or until you tell me to stop." Daniel pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I don't want you to stop." "Then I won't." The reconciliation was not instant. Grace maintained her distance, polite but cold, building walls with the expertise of someone who had been hurt before. Victoria didn't push, didn't try to force intimacy that hadn't been earned. She simply showed up day after day, keeping small promises until the accumulation of kept promises began to outweigh the one that had been broken. Weeks passed. The rhythm of their lives found a new pattern. Victoria in Ridgemont 5 days a week, now managing her company from a laptop in the coffee shop, becoming a familiar presence at Grace's school events and soccer games, and the 1,000 small moments that made up a childhood. Daniel watched his daughter thaw slowly, like spring arriving after a hard winter. The walls didn't come down all at once, but they developed cracks, and through those cracks, connection began to grow. The breakthrough came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Daniel was at the garage when his phone rang with a call from Grace's school. Not the main office number, but a cell phone he didn't recognize. "Mr. Parker, this is Coach Williams. Grace asked me to call you. She's fine, but she's asking for Victoria, not you. Is there a way to reach her?" His first reaction was hurt, a sharp sting of being passed over for someone else. Then he understood what it meant. Grace was reaching out. Not to him, the safe choice, the father who would always be there, but to Victoria, the one she was still learning to trust. "I'll get her there," Daniel said. Victoria arrived at the school before he did, her face tight with worry. She found Grace sitting on the bleachers by the soccer field alone, and small, and crying in a way Daniel hadn't seen since Megan's funeral. He hung back, watching from a distance as Victoria approached. "Hey." Victoria sat down next to Grace, close but not touching. "Coach Williams called me." "You came." "Of course I came. Are you hurt?" "No." Grace wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I got in a fight. I hit Lily." "Lily, your friend, Lily." "She's not my friend anymore." Fresh tears spilled over. "She said something about my mom and I couldn't stop myself." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "What did she say?" "She said my mom died because of me. That if I hadn't been born, Mom wouldn't have pushed herself so hard, wouldn't have ignored her symptoms to take care of me. That the stress of raising me made the cancer worse. That Dad would be happier if I had died instead of her." Daniel's knees nearly buckled. He had to grab the fence to stay upright. 4 years of wondering what Grace was carrying, what guilt she might be harboring, and he had never known. Never even suspected. Victoria's voice was very gentle. "Grace, look at me." Slowly the girl lifted her eyes. "What Lily said is wrong. Not just mean, but factually wrong. Your mother's death was not your fault. The cancer that took her had nothing to do with you being born, or how hard she worked to take care of you. But if you hadn't existed, your parents would never have known the joy of having you. Every bedtime story, every science project, every soccer game, every moment of loving you. Those were gifts, Grace. The best gifts of their lives." "How do you know?" "Because your father told me. And because I've seen how he lights up when he talks about you. You are not the reason for your mother's death. You are the reason your father keeps going. Do you understand?" Grace broke then, the dam finally giving way. She collapsed into Victoria's arms, sobbing with the full force of 4 years of suppressed guilt and fear. Victoria held her, rocking, gently murmuring words too quiet for Daniel to hear. He stayed where he was giving them this moment, understanding that some healing required a different kind of touch. When Grace's tears finally slowed, Victoria looked up and met his eyes across the field. The message in her gaze was clear. We have work to do. Together. Later, at home, with Grace wrapped in a blanket on the couch between them, they talked. Really talked in a way they never had before. About Megan's death. About the accident that had been no one's fault. About the guilt Grace had carried alone because she didn't know how to share it. Daniel found words he hadn't known he possessed. Your mother's last thought was probably of you, Grace. How much she loved you. How much she wanted to get home to you. She didn't die because of you. She died loving you. There's a difference. The biggest difference in the world. Grace curled tighter against his side. I miss her. I know, sweetheart. I miss her too. But I don't want you to be alone anymore. I don't want to be the only reason you get up in the morning. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. His daughter had been worried about him carrying his grief alongside her own, trying to be enough to fill a void that was never hers to fill. You're not alone either, Victoria said quietly. Not anymore. Neither of you. Grace looked up at her, red-eyed but calmer now. Are you going to stay, really stay? As long as you'll have me. Even if I'm difficult. Especially then. Even if I push you away sometimes. Even then. Grace was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she said the words that changed everything. "Can I call you Mom Victoria, like Mom Megan is in heaven and your Mom Victoria here?" Daniel stopped breathing. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I would be honored, Grace. More than you know." Grace nodded, satisfied with the answer. "Okay, but you have to help me with the wind turbine. Dad's not good at the theoretical stuff." Through her tears, Victoria laughed. "Deal." That night, after Grace fell asleep on the couch and Daniel carried her up to bed, he and Victoria sat on the porch in their usual spots. The stars were bright overhead, the mountains solid shadows against the sky. "Thank you," Daniel said, "for what you did today, for what you said to her." "I just told her the truth. Sometimes the truth is the hardest thing to hear, and the most important." Victoria reached for his hand in the darkness. "She asked to call me Mom. I heard. Are you okay with that?" Daniel considered the question carefully before answering. "Megan will always be her mother. Nothing changes that. But Grace needs someone in that role now, someone who can teach her things. I can't show her what it means to be a strong woman in the world." He squeezed Victoria's hand. "I can't think of anyone better for that job. I'm scared I'll mess it up." "You will. We all do. The secret is that you keep trying anyway." She turned to look at him, her face pale in the starlight. "I love you, Daniel Parker." "I love you too, Victoria Sinclair. So what happens now? Now we figure out how to be a family. All three of us." Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck. "I've never had a family before, not a real one. Neither have I, not like this. Then we'll learn together." They sat in silence after that, watching the stars wheel overhead, feeling the future stretch out before them, uncertain and terrifying, and full of possibility. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That was the only promise that mattered. Dawn, the question arrived on a Tuesday evening 3 months after Grace had first called Victoria Mom Victoria, delivered with the blunt directness that had become the signature of their household. Grace looked up from her homework pencil, pausing mid-equation, her eyes moving between Daniel and Victoria with the calculating expression of someone who had been thinking about something for a long time and had finally decided to speak. "If you love each other, why don't you just get married?" Daniel nearly choked on his coffee. Victoria's hand froze halfway to her glass of wine. The kitchen, which had been filled with the comfortable sounds of an ordinary evening, went suddenly silent. "That's a big question," Daniel managed. "It's a logical question. You love each other. You live together most of the time. Victoria is already my mom. Marriage is just making it official. It's more complicated than that, sweetheart. Adults always say things are complicated when they don't want to explain them." Victoria set down her wine glass, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "She has a point." "She usually does." Grace pressed her advantage. "I looked it up. The average engagement is 13 months. You've known each other for 15 years. That's way longer than average. Where did you learn to research like that?" "Victoria taught me. She says data supports arguments." Daniel looked at the woman sitting across from him, the woman who had walked back into his life through a broken-down car and a mountain road, who had earned his daughter's trust through patience and persistence and kept promises. The woman he loved in a way he had thought he would never love again. "She's not wrong," Victoria said quietly, "about any of it." "I know." "So," Grace watched them with barely contained anticipation, her homework completely forgotten. This was a child who had learned to expect disappointment, who had built walls against hope, because hope had hurt her too many times. But here she was, advocating for something she wanted, trusting them enough to ask for it. Daniel reached across the table, taking Victoria's hand. "I was planning to ask you. I've been planning for weeks. I just didn't know when the right moment would be. Is now the right moment? Now is the moment Grace gave us. Maybe that makes it perfect." He didn't have a ring, didn't have a speech prepared, didn't have any of the traditional trappings that proposals were supposed to include. But he had his daughter watching with shining eyes and the woman he loved, waiting for an answer to a question he hadn't yet asked. "Victoria Sinclair, will you marry us? Not just me. The whole package. The garage and the small town and the daughter who asks uncomfortable questions at dinner." Victoria's eyes were bright with tears she wasn't bothering to hide. Yes, to all of it. The whole package. Grace launched herself from her chair, throwing her arms around both of them in a hug that nearly knocked them off their seats. "Finally, I was starting to think I'd have to propose for you." "You might have," Daniel admitted. "I'm not great at this stuff. You're terrible at it. But that's okay. Victoria can teach you. Thanks for the vote of confidence." The news spread through Ridgemont with the speed that only small-town gossip could achieve. By morning, Rosa had heard from 3 different sources before Daniel even made it to the garage. She was waiting for him at the door, arms crossed, expression caught between approval and exasperation. "You proposed at the dinner table without a ring." Grace forced my hand. "That child is smarter than both of you combined." "I'm aware." Rosa's expression softened. "I'm happy for you, Daniel. Really. Megan would be too." The mention of his first wife sent a complicated wave of emotions through his chest. He had been thinking about Megan a lot lately, wondering what she would make of Victoria, of this new chapter unfolding in the life they had built together. The guilt had faded over time, replaced by something more nuanced, not forgetting but accepting, not replacing but expanding. "I hope so," he said. "I really hope so." The engagement brought a new kind of busy into their lives. Victoria threw herself into planning with the same intensity she brought to corporate strategy, creating spreadsheets and timelines and vendor lists that made Daniel's head spin. Grace appointed herself as consultant, offering opinions on everything from flowers to music to the precise shade of white that Victoria's dress should be. "Not pure white," Grace declared during one planning session. "That's too harsh. You need something warmer, ivory or cream." "When did you become a fashion expert?" "I watched videos. There's a whole world of wedding content online. It's very educational." Victoria and Daniel exchanged glances over Grace's head, the silent communication of parents simultaneously amused and terrified by their child's research capabilities. But beneath the surface excitement, Daniel knew there was a conversation that needed to happen, a blessing that needed to be sought, not from any priest or official, but from the woman who had lost her daughter 4 years ago and was about to watch her son-in-law marry someone new. Catherine Mitchell, Megan's mother. "I need to talk to her," Daniel told Victoria one evening after Grace had gone to bed. "Before we go any further, she deserves to know, and I need her to be okay with this." "Do you want me to come with you?" "Yes. But I think you should meet her separately first. Let her see who you are without me there to complicate things." "You think she'll disapprove?" I think she'll have complicated feelings. Her daughter is gone, and I'm moving on. That's not easy for anyone to process, even when they know it's the right thing. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I'll go this weekend, if she's willing to see me. She will be. Catherine is many things, but she's not the kind of woman who avoids difficult conversations. The drive to Boulder took just over an hour, winding through mountain roads that reminded Victoria of the day everything had started. She had been on a similar road when her car died, when Daniel Parker had appeared like something out of a half-remembered dream, when 15 years of wondering had suddenly collapsed into recognition. Catherine Mitchell's house was a modest craftsman on a tree-lined street, the kind of home that spoke of stability and permanence. Victoria parked on the street, her heart pounding in a way it hadn't since her earliest days of corporate negotiations. Boardrooms full of hostile investors had nothing on the prospect of meeting her fiancé's former mother-in-law. The door opened before she could knock. Catherine stood in the entrance, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, her posture conveying the same quiet strength that Victoria recognized in Grace. "You must be Victoria. I've heard a lot about you." "Thank you for agreeing to see me, Mrs. Mitchell." "Catherine, and come in. I've made tea." The interior of the house was a shrine to memory. Photographs of Megan covered every surface, from childhood portraits to wedding pictures to the last family photo taken a few months before the accident. Victoria felt their weight as she followed Catherine into the living room, the presence of the woman who had come before her inescapable and somehow not unwelcome. Catherine poured tea with steady hands, her eyes never leaving Victoria's face. "Grace talks about you constantly. Mom Victoria this, Mom Victoria that. I wasn't sure how to feel about that at first. I can imagine it's complicated. Complicated doesn't begin to cover it. My daughter is dead. My granddaughter is calling another woman Mom. My son-in-law is engaged to someone he knew for one night 15 years ago." Catherine set down the teapot, her gaze direct. "On paper, it sounds like a disaster. And in reality? In reality, Grace is happier than she's been since Megan died." Daniel laughs again. Actually laughs instead of that forced sound he used to make when he thought he should pretend to be okay. Catherine's expression softened slightly. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." Victoria felt something loosen in her chest. "I love them. Both of them. I know that might be hard to hear, but it's true." "I know it's true. That's what makes this so difficult." Catherine rose from her chair, moving to a bookshelf where a particular photograph held the central position. Megan on her wedding day, radiant in white, Daniel beside her, looking at her like she was the only person in the world. "My daughter loved that man with everything she had. She would have done anything for him, for Grace." "I know. Do you really understand what you're walking into? The shadow you'll always be standing in." Victoria stood, moving to stand beside Catherine, looking at the photograph that represented everything she would never be able to compete with. "I'm not trying to replace Megan. I couldn't even if I wanted to. She was Grace's mother, Daniel's first love, part of this family, in a way that doesn't end just because she's gone." "Then what are you trying to do?" "I'm trying to add to what they have. Not replace, but expand. Make room for new memories without erasing the old ones." Victoria turned to face Catherine directly. "I will never ask Daniel to forget Megan. I will never ask Grace to stop loving her mother. I just want to be part of their future while honoring their past." Catherine was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching Victoria's face for any sign of deception or uncertainty. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy something because her shoulders relaxed slightly. Megan wrote a letter. Before she died. Victoria's breath caught. A letter. Megan always thought ahead. Even when she was healthy, she had written letters for the future. She told me once that life was too unpredictable not to prepare for the worst. She wrote this letter on Grace's 5th birthday, just in case something ever happened to her. Catherine moved to a drawer in the bookshelf, retrieving an envelope that showed signs of age but careful preservation. She asked me to give this to whoever came after her, whoever Daniel chose to love again. She knew he would. She made him promise, made him swear that he wouldn't spend the rest of his life alone, that he would find someone to help raise Grace. Catherine held out the envelope. She wanted you to have this, whoever you turned out to be. Victoria took the envelope with trembling hands. Her name wasn't on it, of course. How could it be? But the words, for her, were written in handwriting she didn't recognize but somehow knew was Megan's. Should I read it now? That's up to you. But yes, I think Megan would have wanted you to read it here, where I can answer any questions you might have. Victoria sat back down, her fingers carefully opening the envelope. The letter inside was handwritten, the penmanship slightly uneven in places, probably written during the final weeks when strength was failing, but determination remained. The words blurred as she began to read, tears making it difficult to see. Dear whoever you are, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means my husband has found love again. I can't tell you how happy that makes me, even though I won't be there to see it. Daniel deserves to be loved. He deserves someone who will see him clearly, who will appreciate the man he is, rather than trying to change him into someone else. He's stubborn and sometimes oblivious, and he works too hard. But his heart is bigger than anyone I've ever known. Take care of it for me. Grace is going to be difficult. She's my daughter, which means she's fierce and protective, and she doesn't trust easily. Don't take it personally when she pushes you away. She's testing you, seeing if you'll stay. Stay. Even when it's hard, even when she says she doesn't want you there. Stay. That's what she really needs, even if she doesn't know how to ask for it. I won't pretend this isn't strange. Writing a letter to a woman I'll never meet, giving her permission to love my family. But I know Daniel. He'll carry guilt like a backpack full of rocks, convinced that moving on somehow betrays what we had. Tell him it doesn't. Tell him I want this for him. Tell him that loving you doesn't diminish what he felt for me. It proves that he's capable of the kind of love that deserves to be shared. Take care of them. Take care of yourself. Build something beautiful on the foundation we laid. And know that somewhere, somehow, I'm grateful you found them. With love, Megan. Victoria couldn't speak when she finished. The tears were flowing freely, now dropping onto the paper she held with reverent care. This woman she had never met, would never meet, had reached across death itself to give her blessing, to give her permission, to tell her that what she was doing was not just acceptable, but wanted. She was something else, my Megan. Catherine's voice was thick with emotion. Always thinking about everyone else, even at the end. I wish I could have known her. You know her through Daniel, through Grace. Everything good about them she had a hand in shaping. Catherine reached out, taking Victoria's hand. Megan gave you her blessing 4 years before she knew who you would be. I'm giving you mine now. Take care of my family, Victoria. They've been through enough. I will, I promise." Catherine nodded, then disappeared upstairs, returning moments later with a garment bag. "There's one more thing. Megan's wedding veil. It belonged to my mother before her and her mother before that. 4 generations of Mitchell women have worn it on their wedding days. I couldn't possibly. You can and you will. Grace is a Mitchell through her mother. You're about to become part of this family. The veil belongs with you." Catherine pressed the bag into Victoria's hands. "Wear it when you marry Daniel. Make it 5 generations." Victoria left Catherine's house 3 hours later, emotionally exhausted and carrying treasures she hadn't expected. A letter from a woman who had loved Daniel first. A veil that connected her to a lineage she was being welcomed into. And something else, something Catherine had given her at the last moment. A sealed envelope addressed to Grace with instructions not to open it until Grace's own wedding day. Megan wrote it for her daughter, for the day Grace becomes a bride. Catherine's eyes had been wet as she handed it over. She wanted her mother's voice to be there, even if she couldn't be. Keep it safe until the time is right. Victoria drove home with the weight of generations in her passenger seat and the words of a dead woman echoing in her heart. She had come seeking permission and had received something far greater. She had received belonging. Daniel was waiting on the porch when she pulled into the driveway, his face a map of concern and hope, and barely contained anxiety. He stood as she approached, searching her expression for any sign of how the meeting had gone. "Catherine gave me Megan's letter." Whatever Daniel had been expecting, it wasn't that. His face went pale, then flushed emotions, cycling too quickly to track. She wrote a letter. For whoever came after her. For me, even though she didn't know, it would be me. Victoria reached into her bag, pulling out the envelope. "Do you want to read it?" Daniel took the letter with hands that trembled slightly. He read slowly, his lips moving occasionally, and Victoria watched the tears gather and fall without him seeming to notice. When he finished, he stood frozen for a long moment, the paper clutched to his chest. "She knew," he finally said. "She knew I would need permission. She knew I would carry the guilt. She knew you better than anyone. She gave her blessing before she died. Before she knew anything about you or us or what would happen. She gave her blessing." She did. Daniel looked up, his eyes red, but his expression transformed. Something that had been knotted inside him for years seemed to finally release. "I've been so afraid that moving on meant betraying her, that loving you meant forgetting her. It doesn't. She says it right there. Loving me doesn't diminish what you felt for her. It proves you're capable of the kind of love that deserves to be shared." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while the letter crinkled between them. They stood on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains, 2 people who had found each other twice and were finally ready to stop being afraid. The wedding planning accelerated after that, fueled by a sense of rightness that hadn't been there before. The guest list grew to include people from both of their worlds' mechanics and executives, small-town neighbors, and corporate partners, a fusion of lives that seemed impossible on paper, but somehow worked in practice. Derek Lawson appeared 1 week before the ceremony, his Porsche pulling into the garage parking lot with the confidence of a man who expected to be accommodated. Daniel was alone, Rosa having left early for a dentist appointment, and Jake occupied with a pickup in the back bay. He watched Derek approach with the wariness of a man who recognized trouble when it walked through his door. "Mr. Parker, we haven't had the pleasure." I know who you are, Mr. Lawson. Victoria mentioned you. Did she mention that we were involved before you, I mean, that I've been pursuing her for years? She mentioned that you don't take no for an answer. Seems like she was right. Derek smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I came to make you an offer. $1 million transferred to any account you specify if you walk away from Victoria and let her return to the life she was meant for. Daniel set down the wrench he had been holding, giving Derek his full attention. You think Victoria is something that can be bought and sold? I think everyone has a price. And I think a man who runs a small-town garage could use $1 million. What I could use is for you to leave my property. Think about what you're turning down. Financial security. The ability to give your daughter opportunities you could never afford otherwise. All you have to do is disappear. Daniel moved closer, not threatening, but not backing down either. Let me tell you something about Victoria that you apparently never figured out, despite all those years of pursuing her. She's not a prize to be won. She's not a trophy for whoever has the most money or the best strategy. She's a person who gets to decide for herself who she wants to be with. And you think she wants to be with you, a widower with grease under his fingernails, who's never going to be anything more than what he already is. I think she already decided. We're getting married in 6 days, and nothing you offer, no amount of money, is going to change that. Derek's polished exterior cracked slightly, revealing the frustration beneath. You don't understand what you're taking from her. The life she could have, the circles she could move in, the power she could wield if she had the right partner. I think I understand exactly what I'm giving her. A family, a home, a place where she matters because of who she is, not what she can do. Daniel opened the garage door wider, a clear invitation to leave. Victoria made her choice. I suggest you respect it. And if I don't, then I'll make sure everyone knows that the CEO of Lawson Industries spent his afternoon trying to bribe a mechanic into abandoning his fiancée. I'm sure the business press would find that interesting. For a long moment, Derek simply stared at him. Then something shifted in his expression, not acceptance exactly, but recognition. The look of a man who had finally encountered an obstacle he couldn't buy or charm his way past. You're making a mistake, Derek said as he turned to leave. Both of you. That's our mistake to make. The Porsche roared out of the parking lot, and Daniel watched until it disappeared from view. His hands were steady, his heartbeat normal. He had faced down boardroom executives in a battle for the woman he loved, and he had won, not with money or status, but with the simple certainty of knowing what mattered. Victoria arrived that evening to find Daniel in the garage working on something under a tarp in the corner. What's this? Something I should have finished a long time ago. He pulled back the tarp, revealing the 1969 Ford Mustang that had sat untouched for years. My father and I started restoring this when I was 16. He died before we could finish. It's beautiful. It will be when it's done. Daniel ran his hand along the faded paint memories flickering behind his eyes. I want to finish it. With you and Grace. Make it a family project. Why now? Because for a long time, working on this car meant facing everything I'd lost. My father, my mother, the future I thought I'd have. It hurt too much to touch it. He looked at her, his expression open and vulnerable. But you taught me something. The past doesn't have to be a weight. It can be a foundation. Something to build on instead of something that holds you back. Victoria moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. "Tell me about your father." They talked for hours, Daniel sharing stories he hadn't told anyone in years. His father's patience, his quiet wisdom, the way he had taught Daniel everything he knew about engines and life and being a man worth respecting. The conversation felt like an excavation, unearthing treasures that had been buried too long. Grace found them in the garage past midnight, both of them sitting on overturned buckets, surrounded by parts and memories. "What are you doing?" "Planning a project. Want to help." Grace's eyes lit up as she took in the Mustang, understanding immediately what this meant. "We're going to restore it. All of us. All of us. Together. Can I learn to drive it when it's done?" "You'll have to wait until you're 16. "That's 7 years. "Then it's a good thing the restoration will take a while." Grace threw her arms around Daniel's neck, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "This is going to be awesome." "Yeah," he said, holding his daughter tight while Victoria watched with shining eyes. "It really is." The wedding day arrived with the kind of weather that seemed personally ordered. Clear skies, mild temperatures, the mountains wearing their spring green like formal attire for the occasion. Ridgemont had never seen anything quite like this, a merger of small-town charm and corporate sophistication that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. The church was standing room only. Jake sat next to Jessica Chen, Victoria's newly appointed CEO, the two of them deep in conversation about something that made them both laugh. Rosa had positioned herself near the front tissues already in hand, her usual sharp exterior softened by emotion she wasn't bothering to hide. Tom Henderson wore his Vietnam veteran cap with his Sunday suit, a combination that was entirely him. Catherine Mitchell sat in the front row on the bride's side, the position traditionally reserved for the mother of the bride. When questioned about the arrangement, she had simply said that Victoria was becoming her daughter today. And mothers sat in the front. Daniel stood at the altar in a suit he had bought rather than rented the expense, feeling justified for once. His hands weren't shaking, which surprised him. He had expected nerves anxiety, the same uncertainty that had plagued him through so much of this journey. Instead, there was only calm. The calm of a man who knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The music shifted and the doors at the back of the church opened. Grace came first, walking with the careful dignity of someone who had practiced this moment in front of her bedroom mirror for weeks. She carried flowers in one hand and her responsibilities in the other, not just flower girl, but attendant witness, essential participant in the ceremony that would make them officially a family. Then Victoria appeared, and Daniel forgot how to breathe. She wore a simple dress, elegant without being ostentatious, the kind of choice that spoke of confidence rather than display. But what caught him, what held him, was the veil. Delicate lace that had been worn by 4 generations of Mitchell women, connecting Victoria to a lineage she had been welcomed into by a woman she had never met. She walked alone down the aisle. No father to give her away, no symbolic transfer of ownership from one man to another. Just Victoria moving toward him under her own power, choosing him with every step. When she reached the altar, Grace moved to stand between them, completing the triangle that had been forming since a car broke down on a mountain road. The minister spoke about love and commitment and the courage required to build a life with another person. Daniel heard the words without processing them, too focused on the woman before him, the daughter beside him, the future they were about to create. Then it was time for vows, and Victoria spoke first. "Daniel, 15 years ago, you showed me what it meant to be seen. not for what I could achieve or what I might become, but for who I already was. That one night on the dormitory steps changed everything about how I understood my own value. Then life separated us, and I spent 15 years building an empire trying to prove I was worth seeing again. I accumulated wealth and power and all the markers of success that the world said should make me happy. None of it did. None of it came close to what I felt in those few hours with you talking until dawn about dreams and fears and the people we hope to become. I don't know if I've become the person I hope to be, but I know I want to spend the rest of my life trying with you beside me, with Grace beside me, with this family that I never expected and can no longer imagine living without. I promise to choose you, both of you, every day, not because it's easy, but because it's worth it. Because you're worth it. Because love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections match your own in ways that make you both stronger. I love you, Daniel Parker. I've loved you since I was 22 years old and too scared to admit it. I'm not scared anymore. Daniel had to pause before speaking, his throat tight with emotions that had waited years for release. Victoria, I was lost when you found me again. I didn't know it, couldn't have admitted it, but I had been going through the motions of life without actually living it. Work and responsibility and getting through each day, but nothing more. I had convinced myself that was enough. That keeping Grace safe and the garage running was all I could ask for. You proved me wrong, not by demanding I change, but by showing me what I was missing. The conversations, the laughter, the feeling of being understood by someone who sees past the surface. You didn't just bring love back into my life. You brought hope. The belief that there could be more, that I deserved more. Megan told me before she died that I shouldn't spend my life alone. She made me promise to find love again. For years, I thought I was breaking that promise because I couldn't imagine loving anyone else. Now I understand what she meant. She wasn't asking me to replace her. She was asking me to keep living, to keep growing, to keep loving, because that's what she wanted for me. You're not a replacement, Victoria. You're a continuation, a new chapter in a story that Megan helped write. And I promise to honor both of you every day, to build on the foundation she laid while creating something new with you. I love you. I love the woman you've become and the woman you're still becoming. I love how you never give up, how you fight for what matters. How you looked at my daughter and saw someone worth believing in. I promise to be worthy of your faith, to stand beside you through whatever comes, to build a life that honors where we've been while reaching toward where we're going. Grace cleared her throat, the sound loud in the emotional silence of the church. I have something to say too. The minister looked uncertain, but Daniel nodded. This had been Grace's request, and he wasn't about to deny her. I was scared when Victoria first showed up. I thought she was going to take Dad away from me or try to make me forget my mom. I was pretty mean to her at first, and she didn't get mad. She just kept showing up, kept being nice, kept proving that she wasn't going anywhere. My mom wrote a letter for when I get married someday. I can't read it yet, but I know it's there. She thought about the future, even when she knew she wouldn't see it. She wanted me to be happy, even after she was gone. I think she would like Victoria. I think she would be glad that Dad found someone who loves us the way she did. Not the same way, because nobody can be my mom, but in her own way, which is pretty great. So I promise too. I promise to be part of this family even when I'm being difficult. I promise to let Victoria help me with stuff, even when I think I don't need help. I promise to remember that she chose us, and that's a pretty big deal. We're going to be happy, all three of us, because that's what families do. There wasn't a dry eye in the church when she finished. Rosa had given up on tissues, entirely tears streaming down her face without apology. Even the minister had to take a moment to compose himself before continuing. The rings were exchanged, the words were spoken, and Daniel kissed his wife for the first time since they were barely more than children themselves. The congregation erupted into applause, and Grace threw her arms around both of them, completing the embrace that had been 15 years in the making. The reception was held at Parker Auto Repair, transformed beyond recognition by decorations that somehow managed to honor both the corporate sophistication Victoria brought and the working-class authenticity Daniel embodied. String lights hung from the rafters. Tables were arranged around the bays where cars usually sat. The contrast between oil-stained concrete and elegant table settings shouldn't have worked, but it captured their relationship perfectly. Jessica Chen gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure, sharing stories of Victoria's early days in business, while acknowledging the transformation that love had brought. Jake followed with tales of Daniel's legendary stubbornness and the betting pool the garage employees had run on whether he would ever actually propose. Grace took the microphone last, her voice steady, despite her youth. My dad used to tell me that the measure of a person isn't what they have. It's whether the people around them are taken care of. Victoria takes care of us. She helps with homework and cheers at soccer games and doesn't get mad when I ask too many questions. She makes my dad smile in a way he didn't used to. She makes me feel like I have a family again. So, to Victoria, welcome to the Parkers. We're kind of weird, and we eat too many frozen dinners, and Dad burns pancakes more than he admits. But we love each other, and now we love you too. Thanks for choosing us. The applause was thunderous, but Daniel barely heard it. He was too busy watching his daughter return to her seat, seeing in her the woman she was becoming, the legacy of both the mothers who had shaped her. Victoria leaned close, her voice soft enough that only he could hear. We did good. We're just getting started. The music shifted to something slower, and Daniel led his wife onto the makeshift dance floor for their first dance as a married couple. Grace joined them halfway through, the three of them swaying together while cameras flashed and guests watched with the satisfied expressions of people witnessing something rare and real. 1 year later, the Mustang roared to life for the first time in 3 decades. The restoration had taken 12 months of weekends and evenings of grease-stained hands and stubborn bolts, and lessons learned through trial and error. Daniel had guided them through the mechanical work, Victoria had handled research and parts sourcing, and Grace had documented every step in a notebook that would someday be a family treasure. They stood in the garage, the three of them listening to the engine that represented so much more than automotive engineering. 4 generations of Parker knowledge now extended to include the family they had become. Can we drive it? Grace asked, bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. Where do you want to go? Ice cream, Mrs. Patterson's. It's tradition. Daniel looked at Victoria, who smiled and nodded. Tradition it is. They piled into the Mustang Grace, squeezing into the back seat that wasn't really meant for passengers, Victoria riding shotgun with the window down and the wind in her hair. Daniel drove slowly through town, waving at neighbors who stopped to stare at the classic car that had been hidden in his garage for so long. Mrs. Patterson herself came out to see the Mustang, her eyes going wide with recognition. "That's your father's car, the one he was always working on." "It was. Now it's ours." "He would be so proud, Daniel. So proud." They ate ice cream on the bench outside the shop, watching the sun set over the mountains, the restored Mustang gleaming in the golden light. Grace had chocolate on her chin and opinions about next year's science fair project. Victoria was already planning the anniversary trip they would take once business settled down. Daniel sat between them, content in a way he had once thought impossible. "Dad," Grace's voice cut through his thoughts. "Yeah, sweetheart. This is good, all of this. I just wanted to say that." "I know, honey, I know." Victoria reached across Grace to take Daniel's hand, the gesture now as natural as breathing. They had built something here in this small town with its mountain views and nosy neighbors and garage that had served 4 generations. Something that couldn't be measured in revenue or market share. Something that mattered. The sun sank below the peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Daniel Parker sat with his family, his rebuilt car, his reconstructed life, and understood finally what his father had meant all those years ago. The measure of a man isn't the size of his kingdom. It's whether the people in his kingdom are taken care of. His people were taken care of. His kingdom was complete. And somewhere he liked to think 2 women were watching. One who had loved him first, and one who had taught him everything. Both of them smiling. Both of them proud.